Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Medtech, the premier podcast for the medical device and diagnostic industry. I'm Omar Ford, managing editor of MDDI, an online publication owned by Informa. This episode is amazing. We're going to be talking about the regulatory process, especially the ins and outs of the European Union Medical Device Regulation, EU MDR, with Ethan Drower, operating partner and co-founder of Citemed. Buckle up, gang. This is going to be a good one. So let's jump right on in. Let's talk MedTech with Citemed's Ethan Drower. Ethan, welcome to Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks for joining us. I know we have a ton to talk about today with Citemed, but I wonder if you could start off by telling us a little bit about the company and its mission, and where did the inspiration for Citemed come from?
Sure, absolutely, Omar. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Citemed was founded based on a perceived need in the medical device regulatory space for combining technology and innovating with essentially incredibly talented regulatory affairs professionals. The inspiration from the company came from EU MDR. And as everybody knows, it's a regulation that has caused a lot of pain, a lot of suffering for many manufacturers, both big and small. Everybody has different challenges. And we saw an opportunity specifically within the clinical evaluation and scientific literature space to kind of blend technology, use innovative software, and combine it with the right people to create a solution that actually will ease the burden for companies that are struggling with costs and timelines on their clinical evaluation submissions for MDR. So we saw the need. Everybody was suffering, either paying too much or just couldn't get their documents in order in time. And we saw the need and the opportunity to innovate and use software and bring in the right people. And ever since then, it's kind of just taken off and gone from there.
You brought up, and I know we're going to talk about this, EU MDR, such a broad topic that, and you're right, it's caused a lot of pain for a lot of companies, a lot of executives. I've been in the industry now reporting on it since 2007, and I'm not going to say easy, I'm not going to say that, but the path that companies would usually take to get approval would first be they would first go and get a CE mark. They would go to Europe first. Europe was an easier, much more. It was easier to navigate.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit. But now, when you look at it, it's reversed. FDA is a more streamlined, I won't say the lower hanging fruit, but it's a simpler process. What has happened? Can you tell us about the European Union medical device regulation process right now? Where are we with it? And why is it so confusing to a lot of medical device companies?
Well, Omar, we're in trouble when we start describing the FDA processes as streamlined. So, yeah, let's talk about MDR. On the device side, it's in full enforcement right now. Everybody's in kind of a different stage of trouble, and there are a few big issues with the regulation currently that manufacturers are facing. The first and foremost is that there are a lot of details to be named later, and companies are expected to come up with foolproof post-market surveillance plans when the reg is not exactly clear on what is going to be acceptable and what is not going to be acceptable. So we have some issues with clarity, and that always can cause some pain to executives, because if it's a toss up and you're not really sure until you try it, it's very hard to budget timelines and manage expectations for that. The other very big issue we're seeing right now is inconsistencies with the notified bodies and their standards. What can fly in with one notified body can be completely marked up with red line nonconformities for another. And a lot of our clients are really struggling to get a grasp and kind of get that certainty as to what's going to work with theirs. And that's before we even start talking about the timelines. Most submissions, your documents aren't even getting reviewed for 6 to 9 months after you submit them to your notified body. So it's a new regulation. It's always going to be messy. It's always going to be a little bit like the Wild West at first. And I think everybody is really just struggling with that level of uncertainty. You know, we're regulatory affairs people. We don't like uncertainty. We like black and white in our checklists, right?
Exactly. Yeah. 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 What are some of the mistakes to avoid during this process? And I know that's probably a tough question to ask, considering that it's so nebulous right now. There's the ground isn't firm.
It is nebulous. So that's how you have to operate. The biggest mistake is assuming that your timelines with your notified body will be met. The biggest mistake is waiting to see. It's a much better approach, in our opinion, to try and be overly thorough and overly prompt with your deadlines and getting your documents in so that you can get that feedback and correct course as necessary. Gone are the days of being able to just submit your documentation and then not even worry about it. Something's going to come back. There's going to be things that need to be corrected, and these revision processes take time. So if you have less than 6 months on your med dev cert coming up, then you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage because of that unpredictability.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. I want to kind of pivot a little bit. We're talking about MDR, but what about other government regulations in other areas, such as the U.S.? How do you how can companies ensure their new products abide by these regulations? And where does Citemed come in to help them with that?
Sure. Wherever you are in the world, there's different sandboxes to play in. There are different rules, right? So we like to advise our clients with general principles, right? Principle number one, definitely don't wait. Don't wait until the last minute. Get your documents in, try and be as early as possible so that you can fix them. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we're seeing globally is regulations are increasing everywhere. They are not decreasing. And what we advise people to do is you need to actually allocate resources, and you need to make your regulatory strategy much more of a priority than it has been in the past. For many companies and many devices, the regulatory affairs is kind of the last minute. You put the bow on the box and send it out there and you just get it done. And we're seeing small manufacturers just get absolutely hammered with this kind of afterthought process. So from an executive standpoint, that means you need to start seeing the more direct correlation between having your documentation and your regulatory affairs department sorted and the actual viability and profitability of your products. Because we're getting to a point in a lot of countries where if you don't get those documents in, your cert's getting pulled and you're unable to do business until it's sorted out. So we strongly advise companies either bring on more talent in-house that have the experience and are of the type of people that can navigate this uncertainty, or just accept the fact that you're going to need to pay for specialized help and specialized services. This is an extra cost. Nobody likes it. No executive likes spending money on things that don't directly affect profitability when they could be advertising. But unfortunately, this has now become something that has to be dealt with. And if you don't, you can suffer the consequences. So that's one of our big, one of the big things that we preach from our soapbox to companies is this can bite you, and it's becoming a much more serious thing in the global market.
What we often see on our side, on the Let's Talk MedTech side, is we see this entrepreneur coming from the tech side, and they have an awesome consumer product that can have some health benefits, and they want to jump into this crazy industry called MedTech. And when they get to the regulatory process, it eats them alive and they're pulling out their hair. And I can't tell you how many interviews I've had with how many interviews I've had with executives or entrepreneurs who say, "Hey, I'm just overwhelmed by all these regulations. It wasn't like that when I was just trying to get my consumer product onto the market, but now I have to check off all these boxes, and it's different for each area."
Absolutely.
It becomes a nightmare.
And it really, this is the reason why we exist, because regulations by their very nature, they stifle innovation. They have a lot of good. We love them. We need them. But what they do is they make it harder for the upstart to get their product out there and actually start selling it to people. Now, you can either sit at home and cry and complain about it. You can say, this is unfair, we need to change things. Or you can do what we are trying to do, which is take the more positive route and say, okay, this means if the regulatory burden is so great that good companies with good products are not able to get their devices to market, then it means that we need to innovate the tools that we're using for regulatory compliance. We need to get better, and that's kind of my mission, and everybody at Citemed shares that vision. We want a safer world. We want these devices to be vetted and carefully monitored. So we need to get better at doing that, and that's innovating on the technology side, and that's innovating an industry that isn't as sexy as the startup world. And there's there's so much to be done. There's so much to be done with improving these processes for companies. It will make their devices safer, and it will allow the smaller players to bring new innovative ideas to the world, which is what we're all about.
Yeah. I think it needs to happen because there's a huge level of intimidation for. I'll throw out a company name. There's a huge level of intimidation for that young startup. But whereas you might have a more seasoned veteran like Medtronic, a medtech giant, a giant in the industry, there's not as much, they're used to it. There's not as much pain associated with it. For that young startup and that awesome idea that it could potentially change the way that we deliver care, sometimes their ideas get shot down because of the red tape, because of trying to get some sense of understanding about the regulatory process.
Yes, and it can be debilitating for the small manufacturer. The large players, they have their own set of issues in terms of managing massive portfolios. But for the startup, that's what it is. It can make or break your company getting these things approved and getting them to market. Startups are a race against the clock. So we need to do better as an industry with providing resources and tools that these companies can use.
Well, let's talk about the clinical evaluation report 101, what every medical device company needs to keep in mind. I saw that and I said, wow, I've got to ask you about that. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. We live and breathe the clinical evaluation report every day. And, under the umbrella of MDR, things have gotten tough. Things have gotten more stringent. The general safety and performance checklist is significantly larger and more comprehensive than the essential requirements of MedDev. Generally, I'll just give you the biggest tips here.
Sure.
The biggest tips are the literature reviews, the systematic literature review that you were doing before under MedDev. 95% of those literature reviews, as they were done previously, will no longer be acceptable.
Wow.
So the standards for systematic literature review have gone up 20-fold, and companies need to understand that they're not going to be able to just simply submit what they had before and move on their way. They will get flagged. They will have to redo it, and they'll have to do it in a much more thorough, scientific way. So the literature review, that's our big focus for companies. That's where we do most of our, let's call it, emergency assistance, where we're coming in and trying to correct a bad process and get it up to standards. The other big area we're seeing people have confusion on and get hit with is within the CER is in their post-market clinical follow-up and post-market surveillance planning. Now, in the CER, they're not doing the work, but they have to commit to a plan and a strategy that's going to be acceptable, and obviously one that is actually feasible for them to carry out. So we urge our clients to make sure that they know what they're getting into. They understand what's required of them, number one, but number two, they're actually going to commit to the plans and carry them out. Because you can't just say that you're going to do it and then forget about it. Those days are over as well. There will be much more scrutiny. They will be checked more thoroughly, and it will cause significant issues down the line if these documents aren't updated as per your standards and your process. So those are kind of the big ones.
Have you ever seen a nightmare scenario with a company in the regulatory process? I'm wondering if you could maybe share an anecdotal story or something you've seen while you've been, Citemed has seen in the past.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And one of our big value propositions to clients is our speed and efficiency of these deliverables. So
Sure.
Naturally, we get a lot of, let's call them, frantic phone calls from manufacturers that say, oh boy, we've got our first set of feedback. We have X amount of days to get things turned around. Here's our list of 50 things that need to be corrected. Can you help us get this done? And especially, as I mentioned, around the systematic literature review. So
let me break in and ask this really quickly.
Yeah.
Is that waiting until the last minute? Should you guys have been involved a little bit earlier? Let me ask that. Yeah, could you tell that to our audience now? Should you guys have been, is it almost too late at that point, or should you have been involved a little bit beforehand?
Well, I would say if you're waiting until after you've submitted to have anybody with experience look at your documentation, look at your templates, look at your CEP, look at your processes for search, then I would say you're generally shooting yourself in the foot. It is too late.
Gotcha.
However, that being said, we have, and I'll share a story with you in a second. We have always managed to get the job done, even on these tight timelines. So, knock on wood, we have not had to turn a manufacturer away and say, sorry guys, this is untenable, that nobody can do this. So a quick story for you, Omar, is I received a call on, it was a Wednesday morning, from a manufacturer, a small manufacturer, regulatory team of maybe 2 people. And they said, hey, we just got some feedback from our notified body, and it's a bit of a tight timeline, but they're saying we essentially need a brand new literature review. And I was like, great, this is what we do. This is why we're here. Our process is MDR bulletproof for lit reviews. This is our focus. And I said, great, just let me know when you need it by. And she got very quiet for a second, and she was like, "You guys say you have good timelines. Could you do this Friday?" And I was like, "You mean in 2 days? This Friday afternoon?" And she was like, "Regrettably, yes, that is our deadline. We've waited. We've worked with, quote unquote consulting firms. Everybody took too long to get back to us, and now we're going to lose our cert if we can't get these nonconformities revolved around our scientific literature review." So fortunately, we had the capacity, and we have such a great team at Citemed. They really are passionate, and they really they really take on the challenges of the manufacturers. So the team was able to rally. We put in two sleepless nights. Fortunately, we have a lot of software tools that we've built that organize the research and organize the output, which is how we save so much time.
Yeah.
So we were able to, just under the wire, get them their literature review in the morning on Friday. I think I probably slept for 24 hours straight after that. The rest of the team took the weekend off, but we got it done, and that's with the clients working alongside us to help shore up their other nonconformities. So we are seeing the toll that it takes on these small manufacturers. It's it's not right to have your full-time employees have to put in all-nighters for a week to get these documents done. Something has to change. This cannot be the new standard. It's just not fair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems like it, and it goes back to an important point. Uh, with the regulatory process, it seems the earlier site med is involved, the better it will be because you can't wait until the last minute, and you can't wait even a few minutes before the last minute to seek out and get help. But
Sure.
it's just a difficult process. I'm struggling for words because the regulatory process is just so complicated, and it's just so stressful for so many small med tech companies and manufacturers. And trust me, I've heard this story over and over and over again, time and time again. So you all are really doing some good work out there.
We are trying our best. We're trying our best to help. And to your point, yes, earlier is better. Obviously, the real world doesn't quite work out that way. So we have to be prepared, and we have to have options and tools to get things done in a pinch, and really close that gap of compliance. But in the perfect world, sure, we can prioritize our regulatory documents. We can get them done 6 to 9 months in advance, and then whether it's us or somebody else, pay somebody that has significant experience submitting these documents and going through the audits to take a look and give you that precious feedback. It is worth the money in terms of time saved from your own people having to pull their hair out over not knowing, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, I know a lot of companies want to stand out in their respective industries, but how can a medtech company be a major disruptor? What advice would you give them?
I would say, and we've worked with the gamut. We've worked with some small innovative startups. We've worked with the big players. I would say my biggest advice for somebody that they want to disrupt in this industry is make strategic alliances, and make sure that the more out there and the more innovative your technology is, the more people you have in your corner supporting you, whether that's with financial resources, or whether that's with industry knowledge, or whether that's with a more of a brand building trust perspective. It's very difficult to do it all and just put your product out there and then start selling it. It's a hard industry to break into as an innovator, you need to spend the time to make those friends in higher places and not be afraid to solicit help. If your device is going to change the world and you can convince people of it, it shouldn't be a problem. But that's my biggest piece of advice.
Awesome. And ultimately, where do you see the medical device industry going with all this regulation?
Well, we are both excited and dismayed at it,
Mhm.
at the notion. Overall, I'm very optimistic and very excited. There's an incredible renaissance happening with artificial intelligence and our ability to aggregate massive amounts of data and make useful decisions. You combine that with the unbelievable, wearable micro technology boom that we've had. I think we're going to start to see some very, very helpful and world changing devices that integrate with the human body at a feedback level that we've never really seen before. So that's where we see that going. In terms of regulatory affairs, it's lagging in terms of the innovation space, and that's what we're really working to change. I see a future in which there are massive shared data sets that are accessible to all manufacturers, where they can actually make better decisions about their device and be alerted more so in real time as to any kind of safety or risk profile issues. Right now, a lot of people still do this on paper, and so I'm excited for the opportunity ahead of the regulatory industry. I think we can get faster, we can get leaner, and ultimately we can make safer devices and help more people, which is why we do it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Even if medtech companies want to find out more information on Citemed, where should they go? How can they get in
They
contact with you? Yeah,
they can check us out on LinkedIn, or our website sitemedical.com has all of the details, has all of the info on what we do and what we're trying to do to help as many device companies as possible.
sounds good. Well, Ethan, thanks for coming on to Let's Talk MedTech. Appreciate having you here today.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Great chat as always.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye bye now.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks again to our guest, Ethan Drower, the co-founder and operating partner for Citemed. For more on Citemed, be sure to visit citemedical.com. That's Cite spelled CITE medical.com. And visit us at mddionline.com for all your MedTech news. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe to Let's Talk MedTech on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. Until then, see you next episode.